You want to take us live?
Okay, you're live.
I see 3 attendees. Thank you for that. All right, it is 5:30 and this is Chair Mark Frost. I would like to call to order the April 5th, 2021 hearing of the Hood River Planning Commission. Let me start with a description of tonight's process and a few disclosures required by state law. First, our function in this land use case is to review the record, take public testimony, and then determine whether the application meets or does not meet the applicable approval criteria in the Hood River Development Code. It is not our job to be more restrictive or lenient than the approval standards, but rather to interpret and apply the approved standards as written. Secondly, we are required to render an impartial decision on each application. This means we cannot have a personal financial stake or bias that would prevent us from making an impartial decision. Before we begin, we will call for the disclosure of bias, ex parte contact, and conflicts of interest from each commissioner. Anyone in the audience will then have the opportunity to question any of us about those disclosures. Our decision tonight will be final unless appealed to the City Council. To appeal our decision, you must participate either orally or in writing before the record closes on the item you are interested in. You must raise before us any issue you might wish to preserve for a subsequent appeal to City Council or LUBA, the Land Use Board of Appeals. You must also present to us any evidence you might wish the City Council or LUBA to see. Once we close the record on an item, that will end your ability to raise new issues or present evidence. Let me describe the order of events for tonight's hearing. First, we will hear the staff report, which is a verbal rendition of the written report that was issued prior to tonight's hearing. Then we will hear from the applicant, including any objections to the analysis and any proposed conditions in the staff report. We will then take testimony from anyone in favor of the proposal. Then we will take neutral testimony. After that, we will accept testimony from anyone opposed to the proposal. Once we hear the testimony, the applicant will have the final right of rebuttal. The applicant will have the opportunity to answer questions and has the last word because it has the burden of proving compliance with the mandatory approval criteria. After that, we will check to see if staff has any parting comments following the conclusion of all public testimony. Finally, after everyone has had a chance to testify, we will close the record, deliberate, and may render a decision tonight. Our decision, however, is not final until it is reduced to writing and officially issued. Here are some basic rules for presenting testimony in tonight's hearing. Only present testimony in the order I just recited, and do so only when given the floor. We'll ask you to put your hand up and then we'll pull you off mute so that you can speak. Begin with your name and mailing address. Please limit your testimony to the applicable approval criteria identified in the staff report. Our decisions are governed quite strictly by those approval criteria, so you should tailor your testimony to those criteria. They are the only issues we can take into consideration. If you believe that other or different criteria apply, please identify those and explain why you think they may apply. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence with sufficient specificity to allow us or the parties to respond to the issue will preclude an appeal to the City Council or LUBA based on that issue. Failure by the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow us to respond to the issue will preclude an action for damages in circuit court. Finally, we may set time limits on the presentations of testimony tonight, although there is no limitation on written arguments that may be submitted. I want to thank those that did submit some records before tonight, and thanks for doing that. So that is the procedural introduction for tonight's hearing. If anyone has any questions about the process as we go forward, please feel free to ask them during the public testimony portion of the meeting. Okay, so now we will consider file number 2020-31, an application by Surround Architecture and Argonaut Investments requesting a conditional use approval for a 30-unit mixed-use development. A quorum of the Planning Commission is present, and I will now ask all commissioners to disclose any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, and bias in this matter. So actually, I'm going to go down the list. So if you can be ready to come off mute, I'll go alphabetically. Do we have Amy tonight? We don't have Amy. And we don't have Bill. So next is Erica.
I have no conflict, ex parte, or bias.
Thank you, Erica. Megan.
No bias, no conflict of interest. Maui Meyer was my agent when I bought my home 3 years ago. But that does not change, does not affect my judgment. Or Taylor, I walk on every single day, and what I notice is that number one, there's no contiguous sidewalk. The sidewalk that is there is narrow and is clouded with mailboxes and utility poles and shrubs. And it makes it where you have to walk in the middle of the street. And also the cars that are parked on the street narrow the street significantly, so cars cannot pass each other. And then 2 years back in 2018, I was part of a working group with Oregon Department of Transportation when they had to inventory all of their undocumented crosswalks for removal, and 20 of those crosswalks were in the Heights. And I worked with them to help mitigate removing the undocumented crosswalks. And I successfully got 14 of the 19 back, one of which, one of the 5 though was at Taylor and 13th. So that's just a quick background on.
Thank you. That's excellent. Excellent insight. Appreciate that. Thanks very much. Sue, still asking for the context, conflicts of interest, or bias.
Right. No, let's see. Am I on mute? Okay. No bias, no conflict of interest. And then ex parte, I did drive around the area today because even though I thought I knew it pretty well, after I read some of the letters that came in, I wanted to check a little bit. And specifically what I wanted to do and what I did was I drove east on Taylor so that I could pull out of Taylor onto 13th and just get a good idea of the current status of the visibility there. And I went around the block and I turned right on one, and then I went all the way across 13th on the second round, just to get a feel for how congested it could or couldn't be. And I didn't learn anything that wasn't in the report already. The idea of the little bit of a challenge of visibility because it's coming uphill and around a bend, 13th, when it heads south. But those, I thought the report stated those fine.
Okay, thank you. Tina.
No conflict, no bias. My ex parte would be that I have a friend who lives on Taylor who has from time to time, because he knows I'm planning commission, I'm on planning commission, has kind of bended my ear about, the parking on Taylor is difficult, and he's a builder, so he drives a large, I think it's a Toyota Tundra, and he talks about how it's really difficult for 2 cars to pass, as has already been brought up. So that would be my only ex parte.
Gotcha. Thanks very much. Amy.
Sorry for my tardiness. I was having computer problems. And no conflict of interest, no bias. My experience with that little intersection is I walk by it every day, and it's the intersection of just between Taylor and 13th. It's not my favorite. It's not fun as a pedestrian to try to cross it. Cars never can see anyone when they're walking, or I would assume if they're biking. And I guess that's all.
All right, thanks. I see Commissioner Bill Irving has joined. Bill, we're just
Yes.
actually going around the horn, asking for any conflicts of interest, ex parte communication, or bias.
Sorry. Yep, sorry I jumped in late. I'm planning to recuse myself this evening.
Okay,
I am, the project is owned by the entity that I work for. So I think it would be in everybody's best interest to not have me participate.
understood. Thanks for dialing in for that.
Yep.
And myself, no conflicts of interest, no ex parte contact or bias. Okay, let me keep going with the script. Would anyone in the audience like to question any commissioner or disclosure, or any disclosure of ex parte contact, bias, or conflict of interest, or otherwise challenge the participation of any member of the commission? So if so, raise your hand and we will bring you off mute and you can make that disclosure. And while you think about that, would any commission member like to make a motion to disqualify any other commissioner from hearing this application? Hearing none, I think we are good to go. All right. May I have the staff report, please? Dustin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This staff report was provided a week in advance to you. It includes not only my written write-up, but materials from the traffic analysis, exhibits A1 to A3, which are materials provided by the applicant, including their narrative, site plan, elevations, and other relevant details, as well as the neighborhood comments we received before March 26th, as noticed in this hearing request. They've all been provided in advance. I believe the packet is 228 pages. About 100 of those are turning templates and traffic information. So although the packet may seem like a lot, those are some of the detailed work that went into this. Again, this is a request and public hearing for a conditional use permit for a mixed use development that includes 30 dwelling units, as well as approximately 1,280 square feet of commercial use on the first floor. The proposal does include the construction of a private parking structure on the first floor of the building, public utilities, and some associated site improvements, including landscaping, street frontage improvements such as sidewalk and street trees. Generally, this project is to be completed in one phase. The applicant, Argonaut Investments LLC, as well as Surround Sound, are here in attendance and will be making some presentations on their project after I yield the floor. Again, this project is located generally on the northwest corner of 13th and Taylor Avenue. It's an existing residence today to be removed. The site is zone C2. General commercial. It's within the mixed use, or excuse me, the Heights professional or business district, which allows some additional fee in lieu of parking, which I will get into. Owners within 250 feet of the site were notified of this hearing, as well as our agency partners, including ODOT and local fire, engineering, and building officials who have provided comments, also incorporated in your staff report. Where noted, there are conditions of approval. These conditions either set the stage for future developments or are requirements to ensure the project complies with the standards included within this application, which are laid out Generally, they come by way of zoning code. There's section 17.03, which is the general commercial zone, 1704, supplementary provisions. Conditional use criteria are located in 1706. This project, again, is outlined as a quasi judicial request, as outlined in 1709. 1716 is included in analysis for site plan approval criteria. 1717 is listed because the project is required to meet landscape standards. And then once again in 1720 are transportation access and circulation. These are all outlined in my staff report, roughly pages 1 to 30. That's generally by way of introduction. The project again is 30 dwelling units. It includes 20 on-site parking spaces. In order to comply with the regulations, the fee in lieu of parking is eligible for projects within the business district. There's a condition of approval that requires the applicant to provide a fee in lieu of parking totaling $87,000. This is listed as a condition of approval within this application. This is necessary to ensure the project meets the parking requirement as required by code. Generally, the site shows in the applicant's site plan is 54 feet above lowest grade, which as measured in the code complies with our 45-foot standard. Again, the site has more than 10 feet of drop off. Therefore, the height is measured 10 feet below the lowest grade. In terms of landscaping, approximately 5% of the site is to be landscape. The applicant meets and exceeds that requirement. There's really in the way of what becomes interesting is this has been deemed necessary housing or needed housing by the state of Oregon. Therefore, even within our conditional use criteria, the standards that we're supposed to apply should be clear and objective. Therefore, any subjective criteria should not be used to deny the application. So although there are some subjective criteria listed in there, they're really used to help evaluate this request and how it meets the code, and how it's really evaluated by the city in terms of a conditional use application. There's no variances requested by the code. There are no what are apparent outside clear and objective standards where there is a lack of compliance found. And I believe I have the applicant here who is going to highlight their project. Again, the conditions of approval, I believe, are listed on pages 28 to 30 and include some analysis for your review. One of the items I felt like I needed to raise because it's a little unusual as compared to what you're used to looking at. Much of the neighborhood commentary that we received included, and they'll discuss tonight too, I'm sure, the establishment of a residential parking district. This is listed within Title 10 of the code, the city code, outside the zoning code, but the intent and behind it is where you have commercial parking or you have parking to where the neighborhood becomes and adjacent streets become impacted by overflow parking. There's an opportunity to establish this residential district in order to provide some level of parking control. And for this application, it's been raised that you should be this establishment should be contingent, or this approval be established upon the contingency that this be approved. It becomes a little difficult because that authority to approve a residential parking district lies with city council. So regardless of the applicant's willingness to do this or not, they don't really have the authority to establish the district, nor does staff, nor the planning commission. So I placed within your staff report an opportunity to use a placeholder for a recommendation or possible recommendation if you saw fit that the city evaluate a residential parking zone in this area to address, if not evaluate, some possible and future impacts upon this or from this development on Taylor. So I'm here for questions. That's really a ramp up of really our analysis. So I'll be here. I'd happy to take any questions now or as we get into the report.
Thanks, Dustin. Any questions for Dustin from the commission? Tina?
I have one. So Dustin, you mentioned that this has been deemed needed housing. And so we shouldn't use subjective criteria in our evaluation. Are there any measures in here to ensure that these units will indeed be used for needed housing that specifies that it's limited to that use?
Rather than a non-needed or a commercial use or say short-term rental?
Yeah, rather than, a condominium unit that someone could buy as a vacation home or.
Condo unit would still be, condo versus apartment is really more of a function of ownership, not necessarily needed housing or not needed. So whether it was a condo or whether it was an apartment, those would both fall into needed housing. Those would be both as assembled, they would be a multifamily. I think the applicant is probably going to talk about short-term rentals. The only limit, it is in a C2 zone. So right now there would be a limit. There would not be a residency requirement. It would not have to be the owner's primary residence to use this as a short-term rental. Really the binding factor or the limiting factor would be the availability of parking. So specifically within the fee in lieu ordinance, you cannot use the fee in lieu to satisfy, and this was just a change this year, you could not use the fee in lieu ordinance to satisfy parking requirements for a short-term rental. So those spaces that are, or if anyone wanted to use a short-term rental, one of those spaces on site would have to be reserved or dedicated to gain that license.
Okay, but would the city and like its toolkit of things it can do have any ability to, I don't know the right terminology, deed restrict these or something to resident housing, like resident of Hood River housing or anything like that?
No, we couldn't condition our approval on that. So we wouldn't have the authority to set some sort of residency requirement on a needed housing project.
Okay, so needed housing just implies housing of this type. It doesn't imply who lives in that housing, or it doesn't specify, I should say, who lives in that housing.
Right.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thanks, Tina. Any other questions for Dustin before we hear from the applicant?
A process question. Is this hearing similar to the Adams Creek co-housing hearing that might have been considered a by right development where we were a rubber stamp committee, or are we actually able to challenge some of the assumptions?
You need to be evaluating this based on clear and objective standards.
Right.
If there's a clear and objective standard that is not met, that becomes fair game. But generally speaking, in the way the code is written, generally these are approvable subject to standards. And the way the needed housing regulations from ORS 197.307 is that you cannot deny an application based on non-clear and objective. So challenging the materials in the record is fair. I mean, that's an evaluation, but for example, based on a generalized compatibility or some discretionary standard, we would be at odds with the state law if we were to say some discretionary criteria was reason to deny this.
Okay.
Thanks, Megan. Anybody else? All right, so moving forward then, we open it up for applicants' testimony. So I think that means Mark van der Zanden is that the person who will be presenting? If you want to raise your hand and we will pull you off mute.
Yeah, I believe we have a couple people.
Okay, and there's a dial-in number and the 868 number. I wonder what that, Mark, hello? You should be able to come off mute and address the floor.
Hi there.
Hi, Mark.
I was going to put up a PowerPoint presentation.
Okay. I also see an 868 number. Is that somebody on your team who wants to also chip into this conversation, or is that somebody else asking a question? Mark, as you do that, let's switch over and yeah.
Maui Meyer should be.
Yeah, he's listed differently and he hasn't raised his hand, but let me just take that question. If we could just get that person promoted, and we can ask the question and then we will go back to Mark. Okay. 868, you can talk.
Oh, sorry. I think that's one of the applicants.
Yes, it is. My name is Ben. I'm Ben Stenn, one of the partners of Argonaut. I'm just looking to, I'm sorry that I don't have the Zoom all figured out. It's not my world, but can you see me? And can I can see you now, Mark. So I'm assuming you can see me.
All right.
I'll just introduce myself briefly. Mark will have a more substantive
Did we, well, I think we lost you, Ben. You went back on mute.
Promoted him to panelist.
Here we go.
Okay, you're back. You want to keep going with your introduction there?
Yes. Hello. So my name is Ben Stenn. I live at 523 East 3rd Street here in Hood River. And I have lived in Hood River since 1995. I am a business partner with Meyer at Argonaut Investments. We're also co-owners of Solilo Restaurant and Bar on the corner of First and Oak, reopening, by the way, after a long closure this coming Wednesday. Please come and see us. I will offer that the house that exists at 1306 Taylor currently is a house that has housed a number of our employees, and it's also been a space we refer to it as the group home, but it's rooms for rent in a shared living space for people who are employed at Solilo Restaurant, but also other businesses that are in Hood River, our peer group, other restaurant owners. And so what I understand specifically, personally, as a business owner in this area is the need for a living space for my crew, my staff. And the idea of a restriction or what the housing represents specifically, what I want to speak to is more the idea of a space that's appropriate in size, that is easily accessible to the downtown city area, the Heights area, walking distance to my place of work if I live there, and then also in a rent range that that's achievable. And so that's what this building satisfies. It's what the original small structure or the smaller home satisfied as well. That was housing for 5 or 6 people, and this represents something on a larger scale, but with the same goal in mind. So my brief intro of my place in the bigger project, and also just a hello from one of the partners in the effort here. Thanks. Thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate being here tonight.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Ben.
I'll go next real quickly. Maui Meyer, one of the partners of Argonaut. We, of course, been brought up to the concept of, why we originally bought Taylor Street and why we're doing it now. We've been in business in this community in Argonaut for 20 years and an additional 10 years via the 6th Street Bistro. We have done a fair bit of development in town and in the region. We have always had a focus, as some of you may know, on affordable housing, increasing density, and basically trying to make sure that the people who are working in the community are able to live in the community. And I posit that our application hopefully is seen in that light. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mark.
Thanks, Maui. Go ahead, Mark. We see your presentation.
I'm trying to get the.
And it froze.
Frozen up, I guess. Maybe I took. Try this. There we go. I'll have to do the manual way. Hi, I'm Mark Vander Zanden, Surround Architecture. It's my pleasure to be here tonight. I am close to, I'm about a year away from the 30-year anniversary for projects in Hood River that myself and my firm has completed over the years, starting in 1992. We've completed probably 50 projects in Hood River, ranging from small houses to hotels, projects down at the waterfront, et cetera. And over the years, we've watched a lot of the growth of Hood River and watched a lot of the experienced a lot of the issues that have come with a lot of growth. And this is the kind of project that I've probably waited 29 years to do. I think it's a really important project for a place like Hood River to be able to create a mixed use apartment building over some retail with some parking. And what I will say about this particular project is, this parcel is larger than a quarter block. And what we've found is we've been asked to look at several parcels in Hood River over the years for a project like this. And there's quite a few quarter blocks, and a quarter block turns out is really just not quite big enough to do a project like this. You sort of run into problems with parking lots, that spacing for maneuvering in cars, et cetera. But this parcel was just big enough to become efficient. And so it really is exciting for us to have a place to do something like this. There are other parts of Hood River that have the right zoning, et cetera. But this particular location, being in the Heights, has reasonably good streets and sidewalks set up for a project like this. It's also located near quite a few businesses. So for us, the opportunity to create a project that where residents could hopefully walk to their job at the hospital, say, it's an exciting thing for us. I'm going to just briefly show, I think everybody has now walked this and knows where this is, but we're at the corner of 13th and Taylor here. And I wanted to start by just repeating back some of the goals that we put together with Maui and Ben. Certainly meet the high demand for apartments in Hood River. And I think, Dustin, you were right that this is much needed housing. I mean, I won't kid you, I've got, I can count 4 or 5 clients that would like to build a project like this because the demand is there, and it's just hard to do in Hood River because of a lack of infrastructure in some places, and again, getting the right size of parcel. So again, we're excited to do a project like this. We really do believe in designing this for residents of Hood River. I think Maui spoke a bit to the and Ben spoke to that goal of theirs, and then specifically for Heights. Heights, I think, is a wonderful place for someone to live and work, and there's quite a few business opportunities there. And so, our goal is to create something that was part of that neighborhood, suitable for walking to work. We wanted to create a project with a very open, efficient, a modern set of apartment plans large windows to maximize daylighted views. We are adjacent to a park. We think that is an enormous amenity. And we wanted efficient units with low energy costs. So this is bringing a very efficient housing type to Hood River. So it will be it will have low energy costs. So it will maintain affordability in a number of different ways. And we want to bring high-speed internet to this for the potential for remote working, which is now becoming more important. So this drawing shows the basic layout of the building on the site, where on the left is Taylor Avenue, and on the bottom of the screen is 13th, with the access for people in cars is generally on Taylor Avenue. There's 2 retail spaces that are either on the corner or adjacent to the corner, 13th and Taylor. And then to the west of that is a 2-way access into the parking. And then at the southwest corner is a lobby that would take residents into the apartment building. The parking is very efficient, laid out in a nice little rectangle. The site slopes a bit from the south to the north, and this parking will slope a bit to the north as well. There's 30 units total of apartments. That will be a mix of 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units. 20 parking spaces, 20 bike parking spaces in a bike garage. And then as part of this, we are making a series of improvements to the street system on both 13th and Taylor Street. There'll be all new curbs. There'll be a new crosswalk that crosses Taylor. There will be new sidewalks on both Taylor and 13th. The utilities will be improved and underground. And the utilities will be improved. We're bringing stormwater from a spot to the east over to almost to 13th, and that will improve stormwater facilities for the neighborhood. And we've set the building back from Taylor Street about 10 feet to create kind of a mini plaza space in front of the building. And we're making improvements to the landscaping on the streetscapes and adding street trees. Certainly been discussion about traffic and parking. We've completed a traffic study which shows compliance with the city's design standards. And as noted, the project will provide the crosswalk improvements and curb improvements, turning radius improvements, and sightline improvements for the intersection at 13th and Taylor. And it will also contribute via fee to 2 of the existing traffic projects in the Heights. On-site parking will be shared between retail and residential uses during the daytime. And then some parking for the project uses the city in lieu of fee, as has been mentioned by Dustin. And the in lieu of fee offsets encourages this walk to work neighborhood by providing more housing supply. And I think this is really commendable, and I know it's not an easy thing for the city to actually implement, but I think it's really commendable it allows a project like this where there can be, some additional units over what, you can do on site, because basically we're putting apartments over parking, and we can, have 3 levels of apartments and 1 level of parking, and you can just kind of do the math on that. But in lieu of lets us provide additional apartments, which I think are highly needed. And in a walk to work neighborhood, I think this makes a ton of sense. So I think it fits well with the city's strategy of the in lieu of parking. And I'll talk somewhat about the design of the building. We understand that this is like a four-sided building. It sits within the park. But basically it's got two elevations that face the park, and it has two elevations that face the street. So unlike a lot of projects in Hood River where it's a piece of a block, this is really kind of a four-sided building, which is a nice thing to have. This is a typical apartment floor. There are, I gotta check my math, 12 units per floor on 2 floors. And we've put basically two bedroom units at each corner where it's easy to get large windows and access to daylight, for multiple bedroom units. And then in the interior, we have 1 bedroom units. We have 4 units that face north and 4 units that face south. And then we have 2 units that face east and 2 units that face west. All the units have some sort of a balcony. In many cases, they're recessed. We have a few that project out. Each unit has some access to outdoor space that way. And then it's a bit of I call it a dumbbell plan where, we recess the center portion so that the building's not just a monolithic block, but is sculpted. And the 4th floor has less units. There are a series of 2 bedroom and 1 bedroom units on the 4th floor, but you can see that it's been set back from the outside by a large deck space that wraps around the north and the south ends of the building. And we felt strongly that we should break down the size of the building by recessing the upper level. I'll call it a penthouse or a roof. But we wanted this building to feel more like a 3-story building with a penthouse. And this cross section shows the recessed balconies on the north and the south and the recesses of the penthouse. This drawing also shows the parking underneath 3 levels of apartment building and the slope of the site from south to north. This rendering shows the south elevation, which faces Taylor. So there's retail storefront glazing on the east side of the ground, the access to the parking garage and the lobby on the west end of the ground floor, 2 levels of the apartments, and then this recessed top floor. This is the east elevation. This is facing 13th. And one of the elements that I'd like to point out is we are building, apartment building over parking, and I'm not a big fan of seeing parking in a building. So what we've strategized is we're building what we're calling a green screen, which is a structured hedge that will rise up approximately 9 feet above the ground and screen the parking from view from not just 13th, but from the park sides as well, which you'll see in a minute. On the left of this image is the retail space. Then again, you can see how the upper floors are recessed. This is the elevation that is on the north face of the park. On the bottom, you can see where we've got the hedge for the green screen of the parking. There's actually the benefit of having 4 very large oak trees on the north side of the building in the park that will sort of make this building truly feel like it's inside of a park. And the west elevation of the building, again, the green screen on the bottom portion of the building, screening the parking and apartment spaces above. And it's a fairly modern building, and it will be comprised of concrete block. There's a metal fascia that is the sort of dark color here, and then wood panels that sort of break up elements of the facade. And that is our presentation. And we'd be open for questions.
All right, thanks, Mark. Any questions to the applicant from the commission? Sue, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question that isn't really from the presentation so much, but from the documentation, and specifically about the traffic impact analysis. And I was just trying to understand how they determine the number of trips. It looks like it's based more on the number of units rather than a number of vehicles. Is that right? I just want to confirm that that's how they get their counts.
Yeah, as I understand it, they use, they have a standardized engineering methodology that they use as a part of their profession, and so it's based on the number of units as opposed to the number of cars.
And do you happen to know if underlying that assumption that the number of units is each assumed to have 2 vehicles?
I don't think that's how they figure it. I don't think they use a number of vehicles. It uses I'll call it a standardized, engineering methodology that generates a number from a trip count.
Okay. And one other question, I guess you mentioned 20 bicycle parking spaces, and I thought it was 10. I just want to confirm which it is.
Well, we showed 10 on the ground floor, but then we have 10 additional ones in the building on the upper levels.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, other questions?
I'll
Megan.
go.
Yep.
Looking at my notes. What is the rent range?
Mark, you want me to take that?
I'd have to defer to you, Maui.
Yeah, so the rent range we're targeting right now is somewhere in the $1,000 for a smaller 1-bedroom on the low end, and as high as $1,800 for the upper bedrooms, the 2-floor units on the upper floors. That's all subject to change based upon buildability and the final workouts, but the goal is to meet the minimum. It's called a DSCR, the debt service coverage ratio, from our bank using traditional financing models. And that's basically our goal for this project, is to make it as sort of competitive as possible. We've been using casually the phrase sort of at or below market, but I think that market's actually starting to creep away from this. So we would probably say below market.
And are you decoupling parking, like selling the parking spots separately than the leases?
Good question. Currently the thought process is there is 1 per most units, but I don't know that we've tested that out in the reality of 80 applications, and how it all works. I haven't really thought that all the way through. I'd hope to include it in the rent. Some of the inquiries were right out of the chute, were, hey, I don't have a car. Can you give $100 off rent? So for a while, we're like, sure, we'll give a discount. I don't know whether $100 off rent is the right mechanism, but I think there might be something like that. Haven't gotten that far.
Okay. Yeah, the deck on the 4th story, I apologize if I missed this in Mark's presentation. Is that belong to an apartment, or is that a common space? That overlooks the Jackson Park side, I'm sorry.
Those would be owned by the apartment dwellers.
Okay. I was thinking that they would be fantastic for taking in the music, but okay. And now getting into walkability. You've mentioned it many times in your presentation. Okay, so first off, what are the 2 existing traffic projects you're contributing to?
So I'd actually have to defer that one back to someone at the city. It was identified that there was 2 in lieu of, or not in lieu of, 2 city projects that were fee-based. So we'd pay an incremental fee to the city based on the trip counts that would go towards 2 intersection improvements.
Justin, what are those?
The only 2 proportionate share districts that we have would be Second and Oak and Rand and Cascade. So the number of trips that would go through there would generate a fee.
Okay, so what they're paying is not getting invested into a local intersection or project.
They will have to pay into those intersections. That's where the proportionate share districts are. So the number of trips that they contribute through those districts, the further away, the fewer trips, but those are the 2 districts that we apply proportionate share to for offsite.
Okay. This is a total just spitball gut reaction, no scientific method required. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most convenient and comfortable intersection to walk across, what score would you give Taylor and 13th?
Are you asking the designer?
Yes, thank you.
I would say that crossing Taylor right now, I would say is relatively straightforward. Crossing 13th, less so. We'd actually propose some more aggressive traffic calming measures to mitigate the traffic on 13th, but since it's the jurisdiction of ODOT, it seemed as though we had to limit what we were doing to Taylor Street, and so we were making improvements to the crosswalk on Taylor.
And that was my follow-up question. So thank you for leading into it. Were there any conversations with ODOT on that?
Well, in addition, as I understand it, there is still work going on by separate parties to develop improvements on 13th Street. And so one of the issues that we faced with this project is trying to make sure we're not putting investment into anything that is going to be redone at a later date by the work that's being planned on 13th. And I believe that's the other reason why we're limiting what we're doing to Taylor Street and the crosswalk on Taylor.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Megan. Any other questions from the commission to the applicant? Tina.
I'll go. Thank you for presentation. You mentioned new sidewalks and crosswalks and whatnot. Specifically, what are the new crosswalks? Are we talking about restriping? Are we talking on the north or south side of Taylor?
I'll go
Is
back.
that
Sorry.
there it was.
Yeah, so what you can see here, I'll start with the sidewalk areas. What you can see here is the implementation of a sidewalk that's actually pushed back from Taylor. Instead of being right on the curb, we've proposed to put it back 5 feet. I think actually that's the city's request. And then doing more generous landscaping in between the sidewalk and the street, so that there would be a nicer buffer between the pedestrians and traffic on Taylor. And then, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not. Oops.
Yeah, we can.
There would be a new crosswalk established a little bit further west than it normally is, and new ADA ramps, et cetera, that would provide access across Taylor Street.
Oh, so that's across Taylor to reach. Okay.
Yeah, and as I understand it, any improvement to a crosswalk on 13th would happen on the south side of Taylor Street. And again, that's being planned sort of separately as I understand it.
Okay, so your project does not address crossing 13th.
No, it does not.
Okay. And then I know in the materials we had, there was talk of this exit, when we exit the property, a left turn only onto Taylor. And I'm not sure if that was, your suggestion or the traffic engineer's suggestion. Can you speak to that at all?
Speak to that, Mark. When we spoke with the neighbors and received some feedback, there was this discussion about trying to mitigate traffic flow through the Taylor Street neighborhood.
Going westbound, you mean?
Correct, westbound out of the site. And it seemed, after tossing around a couple of ideas, which were kind of more just like spitballing, to use Commissioner Ramey's words, we said, hey, could we go out on 13th? No. Hey, could we do this? No. Hey, could we do this? No. We ended up with, well, looks like we're going to leave it where it is, because that was contemplated, all those issues. But what about making it a left turn only? And meaning you come out of the site, you can only go out to Taylor Street or out to 13th, and then you'd hang a right. So that was kind of lukewarmly received by many professionals. But nobody ever said no. And the engineering comments, I believe, that came back contemplated a right-hand turn. And briefly, I was very excited. I said, we cut the left-hand turn. But then I realized they had actually said they want a right-hand turn. So we're at kind of a odd stalemate. But I think it's all open to a little bit more discussion to try to figure out something that works.
Oh, okay. So that's just all on the table. That was just two different competing suggestions. Okay.
Correct.
So, I mean, let me try and clarify or get some clarification on that. So I think is what am I reading is that the city engineer, were they concerned about the additional load of traffic coming off Taylor onto 13th, and that's why they wanted to take a right?
They were concerned about cars like backing up onto the site or blocking the westbound lane of Taylor coming off of 13th by people who weren't able to pull onto Taylor in an efficient manner, kind of like the queue was too short there. And I totally get the logic, there has never been a follow-up meeting with regards to the engineer's comments or our proposal that we do a left turn only. Their way of solving this potential queuing issue was to do right turn only out of the site, in which case you would never go to the corner of 13th and Taylor. You would go to the next corner would be the corner of 18th and Taylor. Does that make sense?
Seems like a long way to go. Yeah.
I wanted to ask Dustin, are you aware of whether that engineering request was built into your staff report? Or is this really something that gets managed during the permitting process?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, Dustin.
Thank you. It did get built into the staff report. We did not condition the approval on it based on, it appears that we have traffic engineers at odds and also some concern about forcing traffic through the neighborhood. Although we appreciate the site distance issue and the queue issue as well, it wasn't something that as the planning commission was going to resolve or make contingent on the approval. That would be something that would be left to final engineering for engineers to resolve based on final engineering review.
I think that our approach would be to try to have either the left turn only, which may have a issue with it, but our traffic engineer was pretty confident in the left or right turn was going to function as needed.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks for that. Tina, any follow up on that?
Not following up on that, but I did have a couple questions just on the units.
have you determined how many will be rental apartments versus condominiums? Is that a set number you've arrived at?
I don't know where the condominium issue keeps popping up. We never designed it to be a condominium. It's always been an apartment building.
Oh, really? Oh, that's funny. Yeah, because that definitely condo.
That's a bit of a zombie something that keeps popping up. And so we want to, this is a rental apartment for rental units owned by Argonaut Investments.
Okay, important to know. Okay. And then is that, I know Argonaut, because like you said, that you have the interest in Solilo and whatnot. Is it something that you're going to like reserve some of these units for your own employees? Is that a business model that's feasible for you? Or am I just making stuff up at this point?
Let me be very specific. We have a commitment to treat our staff in the way that we want to, and to the extent that we're allowed to, we will house our staff where we need to house them.
Okay, and so as an owner of this building, now I don't know, now that I know it's all rental units and not things you're selling, I don't know if CC&Rs even apply. I mean, can you have covenants for things like short-term rentals? Or do you intend to? How do you intend to handle?
So, I mean, I think it's not unknown to you guys, both Argonaut's opinions about short-term rentals. While they're a valuable part of the tourism economy, they began to drive the entire economic equation of housing in Hood River for a number of years. As such, there is in-lieu parking specific requirements, right? I can't short-term rent the units if I'm using in-lieu parking up to the number of units that I'm in-lieu parking. But I have spoken with a number of people, and we're all in support of the idea that we would, by covenant or deed restriction, restrict this and forego short-term rentals in this property, because the goal of the project is to rent to the people who are working in the community of Hood River. So, is that clear enough? Tina, you froze.
Tina's very pensive.
Tina's frozen, my goodness.
All right, any other questions, Erica or Amy?
Nope, mine have all been asked. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I guess
I don't
it's sort of
have any questions either.
all right. Thanks, Erica. I guess I'm sort of curious. You mentioned that the house that is existing on the lot has 5 or 6 residents living in that in that apartment or house. How many cars do they have?
I couldn't tell you. It's not something that we actively track. Ben might know. Ben, are you still online?
Yes, I'm here. Well, the answer to that question is that there are, I think, only 3 people living there currently. That number fluctuates, you know, for the number of rooms that are occupied. At various times, I think there have been as many as 5 or 6 people, and then there's a driveway, and there are about 3 parking spaces available in the driveway. And so I would say that at maximum, I've seen 5 vehicles that are associated with the building. I don't think that's the case right now, but that has been at other times.
All right, thanks, Ben. Okay, Tina, did Tina come back? Okay, I think with that, we have asked our questions of the applicant, and now it is time to hear from the audience. I am going to go in this order. So first we will ask for anybody who is a proponent of the project and would like to speak in favor of the project. Then we'll go to neutral testimony, and then we'll go to opposed. So first up, if anyone is a proponent, if you could hit the raise your hand button. I think everyone seems to be on the Zoom application, so we don't have to deal with the phone line. But all right, seeing none, any neutral testimony? And seeing none. Okay, so and Dustin, I don't know if you have a list of people that are interested in speaking, but I'll now invite anybody who would like to speak who is opposed to the project or has written testimony and wish to provide additional insight. We have, by the way, read your submitted testimony, so I thank you for doing that. I see Ellie Wheeler is raising a hand. If we could just promote Ellie.
I'm here.
Ellie, we hear you.
Hi.
We
I'm
hear you,
getting
Ellie. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Ellie Wheeler. I live at 1406 Taylor Avenue in Hood River. To begin, I'm happy to see new housing being developed in Hood River. I'm a fan of Argonaut Investments' other developments. And I have no doubt, based on the drawings, that 1306 will be a beautiful building with much needed rental space. As I wrote in my original email to the city, my concern is with the use of in-lieu parking and the congestion that will bring to our community. Taylor is unique in its parking challenges. Not only is it a narrow street where cars must pull over to let others go by, but within a 5-block area, it has 2 public parks. Jackson Park, which hosts many community events, and Friendship Park, which has the emergency helipad for medevacing hospital patients. There are also 2 commercial spaces, soon to be 4 commercial spaces, plus the proposed 30-unit apartment complex, which is buying down its mandatory parking spots with in-lieu parking. As a reminder, there is no in lieu of parking facility anywhere in the area. Those parking spaces will be forced onto the streets. While Maui has stated that there is no parking shortage properly identified that has required any formal study, I would like to put forth that this does not mean that there is no problem. As a 12-year resident of the area, I would argue there is a history of parking issues on Taylor, as well as other streets in the Heights. Just because it hasn't been studied doesn't mean it doesn't exist. My neighbors and I live in this neighborhood. We experience these problems on a daily basis. The city doesn't have every real concern that happens in the city on their radar for a study. Issues can exist without government focus on them. Assuming that these issues are real, I would like to clarify and then verify a few aspects of the 1306 development as it has been described to me. Sorry, my goat is making noise. There have been a number of, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, my goat's up there. There have been a number of occasions when the term restaurants is used to describe the occupants of the 2 commercial spaces that will be built at 1306 Taylor. The Ferguson traffic study refers to fast casual restaurant space when they estimated the daily trip numbers, and Argonaut Investments is installing food service infrastructure to the spaces. I have to assume that restaurants could be leasing one or both of the commercial spaces in the development. One restaurant brings significant vehicle traffic, much more is the traffic with 2 restaurants. Mr. Meyer stated in his letter to the city dated December 7th, quote, "We are proposing some traffic mitigation actions," which I think Maui talked about just now, "including widening the street along the frontage we are responsible for and the left turn only provision that they talked about when exiting." I do not see the widening the street frontage measure in the final plan. The biggest source of traffic headaches on Taylor happen within a few feet of the intersection with 13th. Vehicles leaving the professional building, which is across the street from 1306, it has a photography shop and a grooming facility. When vehicles leave there, they back out onto Taylor directly across the street from where 1306's parking garage, the apartment lobby, and both of the commercial space entrances are scheduled to be, causing anybody who's going up 13th trying to turn right onto Taylor to have to stop on 13th. The traffic behind them then must also stop and wait for the vehicle to pull out of the professional building parking area. Having dozens more cars and trucks pulling in and out of the same street frontage without any widening of the street is going to add even more chaos to the intersection. Widening the street where these vehicles are entering and exiting will help minimize the congestion in the area. I ask you to please redress this if it is an oversight of the planning process. In the same December 7th letter, Maui wrote that, quote, "We were surprised at the number of folks who did not deem a parking stall as a necessary part of a rental," end quote. I think he just mentioned that as well. I would think that this in no way means that these people do not have one or two vehicles. It just means that they don't expect on-site parking. They will park on the street. In the absence of mass transit and with people having second vehicles for their outdoor activities, many people have multiple vehicles, and it's not just the wealthy. Every driver that I have interviewed has at least one vehicle, even if they bike to work. People making far less than 100% average median income still have vehicles, sometimes having 2 or more vehicles. My friend has 3 vehicles and 2 of them are vans. He makes less than 50% of average median income. This project may be, as Maui writes, aimed at local working folks, not rural recreationalists who drive large vehicles or who would rent an apartment at 1306 as a second home. But that doesn't mean that that is who will apply for and receive a lease. It is illegal to discriminate in these fashions. It is wonderful to think that these units will be snapped up by local workers, but that is in no way guaranteed. For example, I believe Wyer's End Cottages in White Salmon, which is an example of this missing middle housing, when it was originally built, only housed 1 local. All the others were used as second homes. While it is impossible to know how many vehicles will be parking on the street after the development of 1306 Taylor, we know it will be quite a few. I used 60 to 90 vehicles as a general number for the total number of all vehicles associated with the new development. And these are the assumptions I used. If there's 30 units, let's say a little over a quarter of the units will be leased to 1 person and 1 vehicle. The rest will be leased to 1 or 2 people with 2 vehicles. That's 52 vehicles. You add in the commercial spaces. If they have 3 employees and just 3 patrons, that's 12 more vehicles added to the 52. That's 64 vehicles with just a few people in the commercial area. It's easy to get to 80 to 90 vehicles, assuming the restaurants are of any quality, friends come to visit, family comes to town, etc. There are 19 parking spaces plus 1 handicap space planned. With no structure within a mile of the development, the rest of the vehicles will thereby be parking on the street, most likely on Taylor, since it has the most convenient access to the building. Generalities for sure, but no more than generalities others use in making assumptions of who will be living and working at 1306 Taylor. We are all making assumptions here. To reiterate, I'm excited to see the city getting much needed housing. Argonaut Investments designs beautiful buildings that add to the beauty that is Hood River. My concern is with the livability after the development is built, specifically parking. To that end, I would like to propose that Hood River create its first residential parking district to go hand in hand with its first in-lieu parking development at 1306 Taylor, thus setting a precedent for a seamless flow for the neighborhood, the developer, and for the city. As I propose it, the district would extend along Taylor, just west of the commercial buildings of 1305 and 1306, which are zoned C2 and therefore don't qualify for the parking district. And it would go west down to 18th Street, which is the next cross street. As per municipal code, all of the property in the proposed district is zoned R1, R2, or R3. In this case, it's all zoned R2. I have done a rough measurement and house count of Taylor from 13th to 18th. In my unofficial study, I find that there are a total of 59 parking spaces and 27 property owners on the street, not counting the commercial owners. Of the homeowners that I have contact information for, I have received 16 yeses to the parking district. That's well over half the homes, and 0 no's. 11 I haven't heard from, or I don't have their contact information for. Pretty much, I don't have their contact information for. Every homeowner who lives on the street wants to have this parking district. No one has had a negative reaction to the idea. Municipal code states that during the proposed hours of restricted parking, the number of vehicles of non-residents, which would be the 1306, parked on the street in the district must be equal to 30% or more of the legal on-street parking capacity. I think a rational person could easily assume that out of the 59 parking spaces on Taylor, more than 18 of them, or 30% of the parking spaces, would be filled with parking from the new development and not from the R2 zoned homes. With these numbers in mind, I suggest that the city implement the parking district hand in hand, in tandem with the building of 1306 Taylor, delineating the available parking areas prior to leases being signed at the development. I further suggest that the city design the residential parking district as a pilot project, saving thousands of dollars by not having the initial cost of a parking study. As I mentioned, I believe a rational person can see the parking issue in advance. Creating the parking district after leases have been signed would create ill will with the 1306 residents. I say we focus on making this initial in-lieu multifamily housing development come off as seamlessly as possible, thus setting a good precedent for future middle housing developments. Put it in place at the beginning, knowing the issues are imminent. The 1306 Taylor website states that there is, quote, adequate street parking on nearby 13th, end quote. They don't mention parking on Taylor. The last designation criteria for residential parking districts is that the proposed hours of restricted parking not be any greater than the most restrictive hours of restricted parking in the adjacent or nearby commercial area. That's a mouthful, but anyway, there is a 2-hour parking sign without limits on hours, approximately 20 feet south of where 1306 Taylor is. It is in a commercial area. One would assume this would allow for 2-hour parking on Taylor, maximizing spaces for those using Jackson Park during 4th of July festivities, music in the park, and families in the park especially, or for Friendship Park. I strongly urge the Planning Commission and City Council to create and pass a residential parking district from 13th to 18th on Taylor prior to the leasing of 1306 Taylor. The neighborhood is for it. Maui says he likes the idea. It promotes goodwill and clear intention. It will set a profound precedent for future multifamily housing developments to come. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ellie. I have one quick clarification.
Yes.
So you mentioned the number of 59 parking spaces on the street and a certain level of parking demand. Are you suggesting that some of the permits are provided to the residents of 1306 or not provided?
That they would not be included in this. 1306 is zone C2, and therefore it does not meet the requirements of a residential parking district as per the municipal code.
Great, thank you for that clarification. Okay, any other folks from the audience want to testify? Again, I appreciate your written comments. We have those in the record. I see Kirk has his hand up. Kirk, you are now talking permitted. If you can come off mute.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you fine. Thanks, Kirk.
Terrific. This is Kirk Zach. I'm at 1506 Taylor Avenue, and I have a garage next door to me here at 1510 Taylor Avenue. I've been on the street since 1995. So I'd say long-time resident. Seen lots of changes. I would like to agree with Ellie as well that the project itself is wonderful. We do need more housing. We do need more places. Maui, I was really glad to hear you say by deed restriction, no STR on a building. That's of concern for sure, because we know that can bring other problems. I know that's not something that you've been in favor of. So I was glad to hear you say that. I hope that's true. My big concern, like everybody else's, is parking. That's part of it as well. And then safety as well. Trying to cross the street to go towards the east, when my kids were younger, just trying to cross and go over to May Street School was a chore. I know that we've made some changes, and I would say for the better that we have different crossing areas and stuff, but it's still not necessarily safe to go across the street. A completely separate issue is we can't forget it's a one-way, and the beauty of Hood River is when people are going the wrong way down the one-way street, we wave at them and they all wave back. They're like, everybody here is so nice, but it is of a concern from a safety standpoint. It's a difficult town to drive around, and that corner is not going to make it any easier, especially during the building prod side of it. So parking is of a concern. I know I've written a letter about that as well. I think we've more than addressed a lot of that. Ellie brought up a bunch of that as well. I'm certainly concerned about the traffic flow. I'm not sure on the traffic study. Maybe I haven't been able to find it. I'd love to see the traffic study that's been referred to several times. I'm not sure if a full-on study was actually done or not, but I'd love to see more about that. And the one thing that I don't know if anybody's brought up or not, but as this project moves forward, and I'm going to assume that we're going to build a building down there, what about construction parking? Where do you put that many people that are building with great big vehicles, trucks, trailers, tractors, et cetera, on the busiest corner in the Heights? And then from a safety standpoint as well, people walking, riding their bicycles, et cetera. So these are some of the concerns, and I've brought them up in a letter. I think we've heard about them from multiple people now as well, but these are the things that I'd be concerned about on our side.
All right, thanks for your comments, Kirk.
Thank you all for your consideration and your time. I appreciate it.
Okay, any other comments in from the audience? Click on the raise your hand and we will promote you. All right, let me get us back to our script then. Okay, if that is everything from the audience, we will close the open testimony and we will send it back to the applicant to rebut some of the points. I just heard Kirk asking about the traffic study and construction parking. Also, Ellie continuing to look for clarification on the widening of the street and input on the residential parking district, although as Dustin mentioned earlier, Ellie, that is not something that the planning department or the planning commission, we can only make a recommendation to city council. We cannot make that as a condition of approval. Okay, so back to Mark, do you want to address some of the things that have been raised?
Yeah, I know there was a mention about finding the traffic study. I'd assume that that's available through the city. Like if the Kirk wanted to take a look at the traffic report, he could have access to it.
Kirk, there was a traffic study attached to the meeting packet. So if you go to the Planning Commission website where today's agenda is and you look for the packet, the combined report and application, the traffic study is included in the middle of that. Like it's about 100 pages and it starts on page 90.
And, you know, the scope of the traffic study was defined by both ODOT and the City of Hood River's engineering department. They co-wrote the scope of work for the traffic study that our traffic consultant then implemented. The question of widening Taylor is an interesting one. We had definitely advocated to widening Taylor Street, and it's probably still a possibility. You know, in these in this phase of design, it's usually tricky to get fine-grained design on especially street improvements. But I believe that the city, what the city was advocating was not necessarily to widen the street, but to actually limit the amount of parking to the east of our driveway, such that there would be a wider travel lane basically there, so that parking wouldn't conflict with the traffic on Taylor for like the first 100 feet or so. Having said that, I think that we'd be happy to, when we go through the design process with the city, to relook at the idea of widening Taylor. I can understand to some degree why they were, you could only widen a little bit of it, and then it'll neck back down to wherever it is as soon as you get to the west of our project site. And I think the engineers felt that that was just not necessarily helping. So their approach was to limit parking at that first 40 feet, and that would improve the flow at the corner there.
I have a quick comment with regarding Mrs. Wheeler's comments about the restaurant. So that is probably an inapt term used by us just because we're restaurant people. It's all a restaurant, taco truck, restaurant, very coffee shop, restaurant. So to be clear, and for the planning commission, the goal is not for Ben and Maui to get into the restaurant business. We already have that, and we've been doing it for 30 something years. So that's definitely not the goal. The idea of installing a grease trap is that, and that's the infrastructure that Mrs. Wheeler was speaking to. A grease trap is one of those things that you just, when you've got a hole in the ground, and if you're going to have water coming out of a commercial space, you should probably run it through a grease trap. I've learned that lesson a dozen times now. It's 5 times more expensive. So we just put that in there because there's the possibility that a coffee shop might go in or something like that, but no one, a coffee shop would probably be about the scope of what could be handled there. So we don't intend on having a large restaurant there, irrespective of how it impacts the parking. That is definitely not the goal of this. So just to clarify.
Thank you. Mark, did you want to address the concern about construction parking and how you'd mitigate during the construction cycle?
Yeah, that will be a challenge for any contractor working on that site. It's definitely constrained. The likely scenario for this project would be built over the winter. What we're hoping is that we'll have an approval here shortly, and we would be trying to break ground later this summer so that this project could begin construction in the fall. So what we think would be, the winter season would probably have less intensive on-street parking. But it's common for contractors to have to shuttle people in constrained sites. It's less common in Hood River, but it's very common in a lot of places for contractors to have to figure that out. They won't be given anything in this case, so they will have to work out, their way of providing places for their crews.
Okay, did you want to address the concept around the residential parking district?
Well, I think Maui's addressed that. I mean, I think that's more Maui's decision making than the architects, but yeah, I think in essence, it actually does seem like a pretty strong idea. But tackling residential parking seems like a likely or a strong component to have, along with the other strategies for in lieu of, et cetera. It does make sense.
So I agree that the idea of residential parking district in many other places in the Heights as well is probably something that should be looked at. My only sort of conversation or comment about it is it seems to make a little bit more sense for the urban renewal project to be completed, or us to get a little bit further into this larger issue about the where and the what. mobility as a service is changing the way people park cars. Cars are changing. Electrification of automobiles is on its way. The whole transportation construct seems to be in flux. That's not by way of excusing away our parking requirements. And in many ways, we're paying into a system in the in-lieu process that is supposed to provide us with stalls as part of the development process. But we're just putting it into the project or into the city coffers with the hopes, for example, that when the urban renewal project is done or underway or other development occurs, maybe we can explore the entire area under a parking plan and come up with a plan that impacts the Heights as opposed to just Taylor Street. But I told Ellie that I thought it was an interesting idea and we wouldn't oppose it, and we would not oppose it. I just don't know whether the timing is right to do it. And I'm fairly confident that we can't couple one with the other. But, you know, I think it's an interesting thing to continue the conversation on.
All right, thanks, Maui. Okay, anything else from the applicant? All right, with that, I will close the, actually, so we'll go back to the staff for a quick recap. Dustin, anything from you before we go to deliberation?
No, Mr. Chair, I'm here to support your deliberation. If you have questions, we really have nothing to follow up on based on what we've heard so far. As you mentioned, the traffic analysis is actually two options to be required by the city engineer: a traffic assessment letter, which is a shortened version, or a traffic impact analysis. This was a traffic impact analysis performed by Ferguson Associates. So it addresses not only the site, the trip generation, but also off-site intersection impacts. And that is included and available on the city's website in this meeting packet, as well as the packet you've been provided. So if you have any questions as we go through, I'd be happy to try to address them and support your deliberations.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thanks, Dustin. All right, so with that, we will close the hearing for comments and input, and we will move to deliberation. So Planning Commission.
Hey, Mark?
Yeah, Tina.
Can I have one more question for Dustin on this?
You bet.
So regarding the traffic study and the whole left turn, right turn business, is that something that the traffic engineer decides? Is that something that Planning Commission has any involvement in or say in? Should we dip our toe in that, or just know that that's not ours to deal with?
I believe you have a condition. Yeah, it will come down to the city engineer. Access points will be determined by the city engineer. It is their purview. I believe I put a placeholder in your conditions that modifications to the entrance may be necessary based on that engineer call. So I've kind of left a acknowledgement that it wouldn't be a surprise to the applicant if there is a demand on them in the future by the city engineer to change that direction. But that will be an engineering call, not a planning commission call or a planning staff call.
Okay, so that would not be, we would not be talking about conditions of approval from the commission standpoint on something like that.
Correct. Not when it came to access on the public right away.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
That was it.
Quick question for Dustin.
Yeah, go ahead.
The transportation system plan for 13th Street. Why is the applicant not responsible for the improvements that are in the cross section of the transportation system plan?
On 13th, most likely, I believe they have a bike lane obligation, a striping obligation, but not a full cross section build out. So they will not gain access to that street. They will not be provided access to that street. Their only access is off Taylor. So at this point, engineering is not required the upgrades to 13th. Also, the TSP cross section may be less than a year left of shelf life based on Heights Urban Renewal.
Okay, that was my quick follow-up question. So the Oregon or the ODOT letter included in the packet said ODOT recommends including this intersection in the upcoming transportation system plan update to evaluate solutions. And you said that's within a year away pending urban renewal.
Yeah, currently in 2021, I would expect within this year's work plan that we have a alternative and preferred alternative design concept for the Heights. So project is 15 to 18 months in length. We're about 3 months into it right now. So within a year's time, we should anticipate a much more global but nuanced look at the Heights and its transportation from May Street, 12th, 13th through Belmont. So including this intersection as well.
Gotcha.
All right. Let us open this up for deliberation then. So I think we've all seen the draft conditions of approval starting on page 34 of the packet and going through to 38. I guess my question for you all is, what topics would you like to raise for us to deliberate on? I will entertain any issues that you see with the conditions of approval that you would like to change, or is it all good to go? So the first, yeah, go ahead.
I would like to discuss the 12th or the 13th and Taylor intersection improvement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Start us off.
Okay. So this is not, what I'm about to say is nothing reflective of the applicant. I think this is a project that needs to happen like 10 years ago. I don't really know what we can do. I feel very frustrated with a lack of accountability and a lack of vision for transportation and safety. And I was very surprised that I didn't see any improvements besides a crosswalk on Taylor Street. Maui referenced it, and I'm totally in agreement with them that I don't want them to invest any money into something that's going to get torn out. That's not what I'm suggesting. But I do think there should be some responsibility and partnership between ODOT, the city, and the applicant to provide a vision for what this could look like in the future to help ease some of the concerns of the residents and myself. I walk on Taylor all the time, and I walk across that intersection that's a crosswalk that says closed because it is safer for me. It feels safer. So my question to the Planning Commission and to Dustin is, I don't know what we can do to require that the applicant is in some way helps shape the design of this intersection in the future, and they're a little bit financially responsible for it. I was excited to hear Mark say they were actually entertaining the idea of traffic calming. And then just a quick little backstory on that ODOT conversation that I told you I was involved with, the working group, is that they were going to do a pilot with the city to put in curb bump outs that were 1 year in length or less than 1 year in length, stripe some new crosswalks there and put in some sort of traffic calming that would slow the cars coming up the hill. That almost happened. So I know they're primed to have that conversation. So I don't know what to do. I just know that intersection is a mess and it's horribly unsafe.
Yeah, I think both from a pedestrian point of view and a vehicle point of view, that is a really challenging intersection. And I can't see, no matter what this traffic study says, I cannot see that this project would not have a detrimental effect on what would go on in that intersection. So I have the same concern. But I mean, Dustin, I don't think again there's much we can do from a planning commission point of view on this.
Yeah, I think that the timing is interesting. I mean, based on you are looking within a year of a whole streetscape renovation, as well as full intersection redesign street. I mean, the maximum relook at the district. So again, not to walk off concern for the intersection as it is now, but the whatever improvements would or could be done should be tempered, knowing that we're looking at a multi-million-dollar redo of the Heights in general, focused on 12th and 13th and intersection safety. So I mean, that's a significant look and aspect, not only through traffic, but also inner district traffic. So I mean, it's coming. That's what I'm working on. So I'm invested, and I know, we have hundreds of people commenting on it just through this week and moving out into surveys. So I mean, it's my life for the next 15 months. So
Any other comments on 13th and Taylor intersection crosswalk? Tina, I see you coming off mute.
Well, yeah, I guess I kind of am agreeing with what we're all saying. Is it just seems it seems that we should be doing something. It's hard to say we're going to add all these housing units to an intersection that we know is dangerous, and we're going to have 50 more people crossing that dangerous intersection, but yet we're going to wait till urban renewal goes through. I mean, that's going to be years before that intersection gets fixed. I mean, are we okay with that? Are we saying we're going to accept that? Is there, I don't know, I guess I feel like it behooves us to at least brainstorm if there's something that makes sense in the interim that maybe wouldn't get ripped out. A flashing beacon coming up the hill, saying that it's a busy pedestrian crossing. I don't know. I guess I'm not comfortable saying like, oh yeah, this is going to get fixed someday, and not really having any end number in sight, end date in sight.
What about what we call a beg button, where you're pressing a button begging to walk, that was tied to the flashing beacon? Is that too much to ask?
The one that's by Rosauers has that, where you.
Yeah, except the distance between the two is different, where when you're driving up the hill, you see it like maybe 50 feet before the actual crossing.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't stay flashing all the time. It's only when somebody is.
Yeah, knowing that someone wants to go, or like the library, but yeah, like you're saying, but there's a distance. See, I guess I feel like we need something to, as people are zooming up that hill in 2 lanes, something to say, hey, there's a pedestrian ahead that is about to step into the street. And I don't know, this gets very complex because who pays for that? We also get into this whole in-lieu parking, and I guess parking might be a separate topic, but we kind of have this money that's going into this black hole of city funds. And is there any way that the in-lieu money from the Heights projects is going to Heights improvements? And I guess that's another question. But it seems that, we're not building a parking structure in the Heights anytime soon that I'm aware of. So those in-lieu fees, if we could use them for things like, ameliorating some of these issues, I think that would be valuable.
Yeah, I guess, Dustin, is that something that we can ask for, or redirect the in-lieu fees towards mitigating that pedestrian crosswalk?
On the crosswalk or the parking district?
Crosswalk.
I think that's a little bit of a stretch. Technically, the in should be dedicated to some sort of parking management. You could recommend they go to the crosswalk. I would have to double check whether that's too far of a reach from true parking to another mode. I just would want to look before I committed to it. You could recommend it, and I could test it, but I would have to see how far afield is that from our current in lieu restriction, because those are restricted funds. So they are not into the general fund. They're set aside. So that would have to be a project though. And I guess we would need to determine too, how much does an ODOT crosswalk cost with a push button?
Dustin, are in lieu fees dedicated to districts? I mean, would in lieu for this, whatever it's called, the Heights Business District or whatever, is that specific? Does that go in a specific pot of money for Heights improvements, or does it all go into
Just the in lieu. There's one line item for all in lieu.
Yeah, okay. Any other comments on the pedestrian crossing 13th? How about we talk about the parking district then? What is everybody's feeling on the concept of a parking district? Not that we are going to make that a condition of approval, but it's something that is included as number 1 in our draft conditions of approval that the Planning Commission recommends regarding a residential parking district. So we can make a recommendation to City Council, and that's about it. But what do people think about that? What do people think about the parking situation on Taylor? And I wouldn't mind actually hearing everybody's opinion on that.
I have a question about that first. My understanding is that, and when we say parking district, are we saying an on-street residential parking permit program?
That's what I'm hearing.
And for whom?
For the residences along Taylor from 13th to 18th, not including the 2 commercial units at the end on 13th.
And why specifically do you not include people who live on that street?
You mean in 1306, this project?
Yes.
Because the feeling that, well, I'm just summarizing what I'm reading in the testimony and what Ellie had said, is that they feel like adding 60 or 90 cars to the street from this development puts an undue burden on a narrow street. And so they would like to maintain that the street with 59 parking spaces is for exclusive use for the residences down the rest of that street.
Okay, so are they paying for these street permits?
I don't know the answer to that.
That's okay. So I don't really understand how this works, because in a residential street parking program, any resident can buy a parking permit sticker for their car. And in some cases, the parking permits are subsidized based on that person's income. So in order for it to be an equitable parking district, anybody who lives on that street should be able to buy a permit.
Dustin, do you have any? We don't have any parking district permits, do we? Or do we have one down by Full Sail that those?
No, we have not
condominiums down there?
we have not initiated one yet. Some of those details would be worked out on who is eligible and at what cost and at what rate. I don't have a precedent for that yet, but again, this would be something that only after a hearing regarding the district and consideration of the survey would City Council make a recommendation on it. So those would be we're just speculating on what the terms and geography would be. So whether it's a paid for on-street parking, whether it was unpaid, who became eligible, those would be matters of City Council purview discussed, and they would deliberate that at the hearing, at their hearing.
I would be in favor of a parking district that was looked at through the equity lens.
Okay, thank you, Megan. Any other comments?
On the parking specifically,
Yeah, let's stick with the parking for a second. Let's just
Okay.
kind of go around the
Yeah.
horn. I'm sort of curious about everyone's thoughts
Yeah.
on the parking. So
Yeah,
go ahead.
Well, when I first read it, I thought it was really a great idea. I think there's just a lot of challenges because we don't have a precedent. We don't know the details. That will have to be left to city council, but I think we definitely should put a recommendation in that says we would recommend some kind of parking permit system be set up for Taylor. And it might need to be temporary in length and reviewed in a 2-year increments or something, because there will be so much change in terms of development up there in the Heights area. I don't know if we can put a time zone around that or not, but that could be another thing the city council would have to determine, but I am in favor of it.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Next up, Amy.
Yes, I'm in favor of a parking district as well. And I think it's actually very important to get it, at least the process started sooner rather than later, as additional infill happens within the Heights. I don't think it should just necessarily be restricted towards Taylor, but it should be looked at kind of in a broader sense as well. And in addition to the equity lens that Megan was talking about, just the amount of cars or permits that each, again, I know this isn't our purview, but the amount of cars that each residential property has available to them, I think it also should be looked at as well. It shouldn't just be, if you live there, you get as many as you want.
You're saying to a rental unit in the 1306
No, so I
building
think
specifically, or the whole street?
the whole street. It just, the residential parking permit programs that I am familiar with from other cities is you only get per unit, you get one permit. It doesn't matter if it's a 5-room house or it's a 1-bedroom unit. It's each unit gets one permit parking space.
Yeah. Okay, other thoughts? Erica, do you want to weigh in?
I quickly want to second Amy's, I forgot about the Heights. It would be great to have Heights wide parking district.
And I'm all for a parking district as well.
All right. Thanks, Erica. I mean, I think where I come down on this is I do feel for the residents of Taylor, but you know, the residents of Taylor are also using this resource that they have, which is to park on the public street. But given the narrowness of that street, what I think I'm concerned with the most is just, you know, a project like this kind of under a certain set of assumptions, which is that people won't have cars. And then if they do, the neighborhood really becomes an unsafe place, to be honest. I mean, I know those intersections, and even if people park on 13th Street, that's really, I mean, if 13th Street, as you come up from the hill from May Street up to Taylor, there's not a lot of people that park on that right-hand side of the street because it's so dangerous to park and back into. And if that becomes a parking zone for this development, you know, that's really going to change the safety of that hill, which is already an unsafe place. Not even before you turn the corner onto Taylor. So I have some huge concerns about, you know, this sort of idea that you know, the numbers of cars will be low, and I would look for any way to try and make that actually happen, as opposed to just burden the rest of the Heights. So I really like the idea of the parking district actually across the Heights wide to try and accommodate some thoughts around that. Okay, other topics then. Yeah, go ahead, Tina.
I haven't weighed in on this parking one yet.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess I first have a question. Is parking allowed on both sides of Taylor at this point?
It is now, yep.
Okay. Okay.
And there's a lot of curb cuts.
I might have a completely different approach to this. I guess, first of all, I don't really understand how these residential parking districts work. First of all,
I definitely think if we do something, it can't just be Taylor. It needs to be neighborhood wide. In fact, I guess as a commission, I think we need to think beyond Taylor, even for these traffic issues. I mean, we're talking about whether people come out here as a left turn or a right turn. I mean, and I know this isn't our decision to make, but I think it impacts how we think about this project. If people are forced to come out and make a left turn and they want to go to, Safeway, they're just going to drive down the next neighborhood street. They're going to go down 13th and then they're going to turn down the next street. And so this really is a neighborhood wide puzzle that I think we need to solve. And I think the same is true of parking. If people can't find a place to park on Taylor, they're going to park on, what is the next one? Pine?
C or B or A.
Yeah. So don't
Or
you think it's
13th or
just, so if you
Prospect.
set up something for Taylor, it's just going to spill to the next street. And so I think if we're going to be equitable, it definitely needs to be the whole neighborhood. But I guess I don't know. I just go back to this thing where these are public city streets. We all pay for them. I think we all have a right to use them equally. So just because someone's house happens to be on, street XYZ, it isn't quote unquote their parking to use. It's really anyone's parking to use. I mean, anyone who lives downtown knows that people who work downtown park all up and down Cascade and Columbia. When it's, the Hops Fest, people park up and down and no one gets to really claim those spots as theirs. And so when we start to restrict it to just certain homes get parking, it doesn't feel very equitable to me. And I don't understand the logic behind it. I mean, unless you're paying for a private street, I don't know why we as a city are saying that only certain people get to, kind of have dibs on something. I think city streets really belong to everyone. And then also, I guess on top of that, I'm concerned about having parking on both sides of the street and 2 narrow traffic lanes and how that affects people on bicycles. And so then I kind of want to go way off in left field and say, well, what if we eliminate parking on one side of the street to give this traffic more room to move and then make it a little safer for people who are on bicycles dealing with vehicles. So I throw that out there as something to chew on.
Well, that was going to be, if we want to get into what Taylor looks like, that was going to be what I wanted to go to next, was like, there is no vision for Taylor. We're not even addressing the fact that a person in a wheelchair can't get down Taylor without going in the middle of the road. It's like a horribly unequitable, but also my favorite walking route street. It's very weird. And so I agree. I think the parking should only be on one side of the street. If the vehicles passing each other is that big of an issue, then the residents might want to start parking in their driveway and give up one side of the street.
Oh, that's the other piece I guess I forgot to mention. I mean, in terms of this on-street parking for residential homes, I mean, most of that street is residential. So they already have a parking requirement. I mean, there's already a parking requirement for off-street parking. So that's really just spillover parking that for the homes as well.
Yeah, like they have too many cars.
Okay. But do we have a consensus that we want to make a recommendation to look at a parking district? I guess we come back to that.
It sounds like everyone agrees with that, but one thing I just want to add, because I was thinking in terms of the timing, one of the things that Ellie talked about was doing it sooner rather than later for the sake of, well, mostly just for goodwill for the existing neighborhood. So that was why I was thinking if we make a suggestion that some kind of parking permit system be put in place, and the city council will figure out the details. But if it could be something that we also request be reviewed, because it probably will be anyway when the whole Urban Heights plan, transportation plan happens, but just to know that it's I don't want to call it temporary, but it's subject for review and possible changes. But I think doing something sooner rather than later is also a worthwhile recommendation that Ellie suggested.
Okay. Megan, you were starting to talk about moving on to Taylor. I don't think we can redesign Taylor based on this project, but I mean, I sort of agree with, I think what you and Tina are talking about, which is, I mean, frankly, having parking down one side of it, like Cascade and Columbia, would actually make that a better, more safe route for people riding their bicycles and just sort of usability of the street. I actually worry that that would actually increase the speed of traffic, though, because right now it actually functions as a pretty slow street because people are pulling in and out and those types of things. But again, I don't think that's something that we can really sort of do under the guise of this project. So
yeah, I don't think there's any control we have. I just plant the seed that it's a neighborhood street and it should be designed for 15 miles per hour, not as a cut through street.
Right.
I actually agree with having a left turn lane, or I was gonna say, has anybody explored the idea of doing a diverter after the apartment complex? So it reduces the through traffic and residents can still get to their house and go, you know, either way they want to, but they don't have that cut through traffic going more than 15 miles an hour. But yeah. I don't know what we can do.
Okay. Other topics on the conditions of approval, any issues or other things that want to be raised? I don't think anyone's raised any issue with the units or the height of the building or the property setbacks or anything else except traffic study. Any other topics that people want to raise?
I want to quickly commend them for exceeding their bike parking.
I actually think that's a great idea to include parking upstairs. I think a lot of people want to keep their bicycles safe and inside the enclosed space. So I really like that too. Okay, other topics for this evening then?
I just want to comment on the project overall. I think is really great, and I like the look of it and everything else. I think the two issues I'm concerned about are the two issues we've spoken about, which would be safety on 13th. And I would like to know, Dustin, I don't think we have any opportunity as a commission to do anything about that, because my understanding that's really an ODOT facility, and they'll handle that. Is that accurate?
They handling it will, it's kind of a loaded issue, but
I want them to handle it.
It is an ODOT facility, in fact, and any improvements and or safety remediation do go through ODOT as the lead agency. It is their street. So by way of curb to curb control, that is their facility. We can give them recommendations as well, and provide any listed or noted issues that we have in terms of concerns. You know, we work with them quite a bit, so providing them access and some insight it can be helpful. So they'll be our partner in working in Heights when it comes to that overall streetscape look. So they will be really shoulder to shoulder with the city looking at some of these regional issues. And if there's any signified or noted deficiencies or identified safety issues, they'll look at those too. So we've just asked people for 3 weeks to drop pins on a map to note issues that they had. And certainly the intersections like this get a lot of attention. So we'll already be sharing that issue, whether you want to echo it and make it in light of maybe the look at this particular case. We can share that as well, but it's already all in process too. So
okay.
Yeah, I don't know if the whole planning commission knows about that because I don't remember hearing that from you, Dustin, did we? I heard about it from somebody. Oh, I heard about it from Amy's husband. And so it's MIG's streetscape survey, correct?
Actually, their lead agency, but it is the Urban Renewal Board.
Yeah. Okay.
It's, the city's urban renewal agency is their project. MIG, DKS, Klein and Associates are our consulting partners. See it on the website. There's a web page and there's a round of Facebook too. So hopefully eventually you'll see some analog posters out there as we go out into the real world once again.
And it is a great survey, and fair warning that I spent an hour on it because it's very functional. But I was gonna propose, and we seem to have our hands tied a lot. And I know that ODOT was humoring doing a short 9-month pilot. Would we ever suggest, not beholden, the applicants to investing $5,000 in a pilot for 13th and Taylor, knowing that ODOT has already worked on that? Like simple materials, just as a temporary measure.
Are you saying that's something you want to make as a recommendation?
Yes. Knowing that it's already been worked on and there is a design out there floating.
Mhm.
It's not permanent, it's temporary materials.
You mean like a test crosswalk bump out or something? Something to the effect?
Yes.
I could support that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I could too. I think it'd be great.
It's such an important crossing, that one.
I feel like it would be a way that we could address it without, as I was saying before, I just feel like otherwise we're talking about, yeah, we all know it's a big safety issue. And then, 5 years from now, we'll address it. We'll have something that addresses it. So I feel like this would help at least spur some public response to it.
Right.
So Dustin, can we do that?
Require some sort of technical urbanism pilot project?
By this applicant, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of outside the purview. I mean,
Right, I think we talked about.
There's no code
criteria.
that I could point to
Yeah.
that says, in order to meet this relevant criteria, the applicant
Right,
has to do this. That is,
yeah.
and that the applicant may volunteer to something like that, but I cannot hold them to that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Would it be Megan, were you suggesting funding for it or having them
So
actually
I
be
see
involved?
Maui Meyer has raised his hand. Do we want to take a break from the deliberation and bring him back into the conversation? Dustin?
Sure. Can we do that?
If he's looking to address your kind of.
Let's see if he is. Maui, we have permitted you to talk.
So, can you hear me? So,
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure that you can condition the project on this, but I mean, geez, Ben's texting me and he's like, stop talking. Ben and I are both, we would do something like that, and we have no problem with doing things like that because that's what we've been doing for 20 something years. So yeah, I don't know that you can condition it, but voluntarily, of course, I agree. There are some issues there, and it's important to discuss it.
All right. Thanks, Maui.
Yep.
That's all I was
Okay.
suggesting, was just that's all I was suggesting, not beholding, but recommending and hoping.
Right, right. Okay, so I guess what I'm hearing is there seems to be consensus with the Planning Commission to make a recommendation to City Council to think about this residential parking district for the Greater Heights, incorporating equitability and potential kind of a larger scale than just Taylor. I also heard a lot about this in-lieu fee, and again, there's nothing that we can do to redirect in-lieu fees, but it sounded like there might be support to use potentially the in-lieu fee to take care of some of this pedestrian crossing, or even a greater concern that if the in-lieu fees that, and I'm sort of thinking about the Heights as it develops, if in-lieu fees are being paid for all of the upcoming residential projects in the Heights, that those monies get sent, let's say downtown for parking structure, then the Heights never has an addressed where people are paying in-lieu fees, but in fact, what's going to happen is that there won't be any parking addressed in the Heights, and then the neighborhood around the Heights will be really affected, I think, because I think the Heights is going to be somewhere that people are going to look to do more residential development. So I'm a bit worried about this sort of idea that the in-lieu fee, there's no, even though in the Heights they're paying for it, there's no guarantee that those monies are going to be spent in the Heights. Any other topics that people want to raise? I think those are the two, apart from Maui's discussion there about potentially looking at a temporary parking situation, or sorry, pedestrian crossing. I mean, I think my only caution for Maui, right, is that, you know, we're going to hold your feet to the fire here in terms of this project, right? You know, as we move forward with projects and as you pay in lieu fees, and we're really going to look to some of the controls that you put on the way that you market these, and the way that you market these with how much parking is included or not included, and you know, we hope you you know, come through on that end, because I think the more we see, this is one of the first projects of its kind, and the more we see this type of topic come up, it's going to really set the tone for what happens down the road here. So I guess that's my only comment I'd make about that. But any other topics before we, I mean, I think unless there's anything else, I think we could entertain a motion to make those recommendations on the parking district to City Council. But unless anybody else, anything else that I want to add yet, Tina?
I don't have a new topic, but I guess just as a final point of discussion on this parking business, I'm personally concerned about putting a parking district condition on here that is going to be punted to the City Council, because I just feel like they could get mired down in this for weeks on end, and I don't know that I think that's particularly fair to the applicant. I mean, I think residential parking permits is something that has been floated around this city for years and has not been acted on. And if all of a sudden we're saying they need to act on it now before they approve this project.
No, I don't think we can't deny this project or slow it down. It's completely separate.
Okay, but if we put in a condition.
No, we can't put a condition.
Talk about it?
A recommendation.
We're making a recommendation to City Council. It's sort of outside of this condition.
Okay, just a recommendation, not a condition. Okay, sorry, clarification. Thank you.
Okay. So again, I think, you know, all of these concerns about the pedestrian crossing on 13th, the left turn, right turn, a lot of these are out of our hands. I think we've got a list of conditions that are attached to the meetings. Unless anyone has any changes to be made to those, I think those are what we're going to be voting upon. Yep. So
can I make a motion?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I'll make a motion that we approve file 2020-31 and add a recommendation for the city council to look at a residential parking district. I'm just going to leave it open-ended like that.
Okay.
Not make it too detailed.
All right. Do we have a second? Tina seconds. All right. So we have a motion on the floor to approve file 2020-31, approving this project with the conditions as drafted by the staff of the planning department, with the one additional recommendation, talking to point number 1, that we want to make a recommendation to the city council to explore a residential district, parking district, taking into account equitable access to those streets and safety and beyond just Taylor, but for the Heights. All right. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Tina says aye, Megan says aye, Sue says aye, Amy says aye. Erica, how do you?
Aye.
Aye. Chair votes aye, motion passes. All right, I thank everybody for their comments on this project. I'd like to commend the project team for putting forward this ambitious project. I do also see this as a great project. We're just going to be watching this parking situation carefully. Thanks for your time. Oh, before we go, for the Planning Commission, we have some minutes to approve. Let's see.
I have a
Did
question
Bill-
about that because yeah, Bill was the one that.
Bill, I
wanted-
see you're still on. Bill, you had some comments on the Planning Commission meeting from February 16th. I don't know if you're awake and want to address that. Bill Irving,
Well,
are you out there?
maybe while
Yeah.
we're waiting for Bill, could I get a quorum check for the 19th and or May 3rd, the first meeting?
I'm good for the 19th.
And the 3rd?
If you want me, that's my birthday.
I'm good for both.
I'm good for both.
I'll be eating cake.
So I'll consider that 4 of you with 2 of you as possible and 1 of you with before 50-50 due to birthday. Thank you.
I'll be there. Okay. I think is it okay, Dustin, if we hold off on the meeting minutes till next time?
I believe that is up to Tina.
Wait, up to
Do you
me?
mean Tina or do you mean Jennifer?
For being diligent about making sure that the meeting minutes did not run long after
Oh.
multiple attempts.
This, yeah. I think Bill had an issue on these February ones and I wasn't even at the meeting, so I will totally abstain from that.
Yeah, okay, so let's wait on that one.
Okay,
Sorry to kick that can down the road, but we'll do that next time.
We'll have something on. I'll let you know whether it's the 19th or the 3rd.
So are you saying we may or may not have a meeting on the 19th?
Most likely no, but I just wanted to make sure that in the next 2 meetings that if we miss the 19th due to some reason, that we weren't going to have to miss the 3rd due to lack of a quorum.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
you.
Thanks for your time.
Bye.
Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye.